Well, hello and welcome again to Rare Classic Cars. Still waiting for the nice weather. You can see the snow is on the porch here for the porch chat, but it's not too cold, not cold enough for me not to be out here. Many of you seem to like the video on the worst General Motors engines of all time, so I thought I'd flip the script a little bit and talk about some of the best GM engines of all time. Because GM certainly produced some stinkers, but they also produced some great motors. So here's the brief list of what I would say, in my mind, are the best GM engines, not in any ranked order. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 here, but don't consider these rankings. And I've cheated a little bit. I'll get to that and discuss in more detail. But see the first one there, the Buick 3800. Not the 3.8, the Buick 3800. So the 3800 started in 1988. And that was the year when Buick took what they called the even firing 3.8 liter V6, which had connecting rods that were offset from the piston centers to try to make the car more smooth versus its original origins. It really dated to some humble origins back in 1961 when Buick introduced the Fireball V6, looking for a low-cost alternative to their 215 cubic inch aluminum V8. They based this cast iron V6 on that V8. And by the way, that V8 was later sold to Rover and became a very long-lived engine. But in any case, the early origins of what many of us know as the 3800 engine started in 1961, and Buick based the motor significantly on that 215 cubic inch aluminum V8. So consequently, it had a 90-degree bank angle, and it was not even firing because it was based on a V8 design. And so it was a little bit rough. And the motor was actually in the, I think 1967, but the mid to late 60s sold to Kaiser Jeep Corporation because at that point General Motors thought that there really wasn't a need for an economical V6. They were selling cars with all of the small block, big block V8 engines that they could build. The economy was good. People were looking for big cars, or cars with powerful engines. This is, of course, when the muscle car era started. So that engine they sold to Kaiser Jeep. Interestingly, they later bought it back in the 70s from American Motors, when American Motors had by that point developed had their straight six engine for use in their trucks. And GM smoothed the motor out by changing the design of it a little bit, and the crankshaft in particular, to make it what they called the even firing V6. And that was somewhat successful, I'll say. So the even firing V6 continued and was also launched in the front wheel drive cars, continued through the 1987 model year. And if you have one of those, in particularly a C body like in 98 or an Electra, or even the H bodies, the 88s and the Sabres, they're relatively smooth, aside from at about fast idle speed, I'll say, where they have a little bit of a shake. The 3800 doesn't have that at all. It has balance shafts. They changed the staggering of the banks when they went to the 3800 so that they could move the connecting rod back into the center of the piston, not use slipper skirt pistons, lower the internal stresses and strains on the motor. So the 3800 that came out in 1988 was a vastly better motor than the 3.8 liter V6 that preceded it. And interestingly, the 1988 3800 is a pre-Series 1. I have no idea why GM started naming the 3800 Series 1 with the second generation 3800, but they did. I guess GM also had, by the way, a 4-phase product development process at the time that started at phase 0 and ended at phase 3, so maybe that's the reason. But that first 3800 is just a stellar workhorse engine. And I would say all the Buick 3800s are good. The pre-Series 1, the Series 1, Series 2, Series 3. But that pre-Series 1, I would say, and the Series 1, to my mind, are really the best if you're just looking for everyday reliability, good power, smoothness. The Series 2 is still a good motor, but the plastic intake on those has some issues with the EGR tubes. The Series 1 does also have a plastic intake, but for whatever reason, they really didn't have as many issues with that one. And by the Series 3, the last version of the engine, they went back to an aluminum intake. So in any case, if you find in particular one of those, I would say, pre-Series 1 or Series 1's cars, you've got a great, great motor. And it's a tough time right now if you're trying to find a used car or a new car. The prices are exorbitant. And I feel bad for people who are looking for a car because it's really challenging to find one at a good price. My best recommendation is if you could find one of those late 80s, early 90s cars with a Buick 3800 in it. They're very reliable still. They can be used as daily drivers. If they break, they're very cheap to fix. And they don't have many issues. I've known many people who have had those engines go well over a couple 100,000 miles. They do have some harmonic balancer issues. Coil packs can go bad, water pumps, some things like that. But fixing those is very, very cheap, and they are very robust engines. So, like I said, if you're looking for a used car, you don't have a lot of money to spend, actually go older. Just try to find one with low miles and make sure it's not overly rusty. They tended to rust out, so if you find one in a southern state in particular, you'll be fine. But in any case, Buick 3800, way up there. The second one, I admittedly cheated a bit here, and I said any GM big block, and I should say almost any GM big block. Whether you're thinking about Chevrolet 454, 427, 396, a Pontiac, Pontiac technically, aside from the 265 and 301, everything else is a big block, and all of those are excellent. The Oldsmobile big blocks like the 455, 425, the Buick big blocks, the 430s and the 455s, and the Cadillac big blocks, the 472s and 500s. I will exclude the Cadillac 425 and 368 a little bit. They're not bad, but they did weaken the bottom end a little bit versus the 472 and 500. Any of those engines are just stellar. They're robust, they're reliable. Yes, they did get smogged down like everything else in the mid-70s. But if you're just looking for robust, smooth, quiet motors, any of those fits the bill. I have my preferred ranking between the GM divisions, and I'll share that in a subsequent video. That's a whole nother video to go into the details, because in some cases the internals on some of those big blocks are different from one to the other. Like a Pontiac 421, even if you have a 4-barrel 421, has different pistons and other internals than a 389, aside from just the size of the piston, obviously. But all of those GM big blocks are robust, excellent engines. Maybe I could pick a little bit at the Cadillac 429 that preceded the 472. It was generally a good engine, but they had an aluminum timing cover where the oil pump sat in there, and sometimes the oil pump chews away at the timing cover. Good luck trying to find a timing cover for one of those now. But by and large, all those GM big block engines are just stellar, and they're always coupled, I shouldn't say always, but frequently coupled to a turbo-hydromatic 400 transmission. It just doesn't get much better than that. The turbo-hydromatic 400 transmissions were used not just by GM, but by a lot of international companies, Rolls-Royce, Ferrari in some cases. I believe even Jaguar used it, or I should say Jaguar. So great, great engines. Again, I'll reveal my preference between the divisions in a subsequent video, but they are stellar. Number 3, most pre-1977 GM small block engines. So the small block Chevy was obviously GM's big volume motor for a long time, and it was excellent. Excellent, excellent engine. You can pick at the 305s, 307s, smog motors. I think the reason I put pre-1977 was a couple reasons. Number one, on the 350s even and the 305s, after that period, they started having some soft camshafts for a few years into the early 80s. So just something to be aware of. And then you get like the Pontiac 265 and 301. and other, I'll say, small displacement, sub 300 cubic inch engines, like even from Oldsmobile, that they're not quite the same. A Pontiac 301, by the way, it can be an okay motor. The Turbo 301s like to blow gaskets quite a bit, as you can imagine, but the base 301 was relatively okay if you didn't rev it. That crankshaft only has 2 counterweights on a 301. I would not call it a robust crankshaft at all. But most of these pre-1977 GM small blocks, whether you're talking about a Chevrolet 283, 327, 350, a Pontiac, I shouldn't call the Pontiac 350 a small block. It's not. But I'll just say, let's group that with the big blocks for the moment. A 350 Pontiac, great motor. 400 Pontiac, great motor. The Olds 350, which is a small block, excellent. The Buick 350, which is a small block, excellent. And so long as you kind of stick to pre-1977, once you get to 77, there's some permutations and some, I'll call it bottom end lightweighting that went on that made the motors less robust. So like an Olds 403, which is a small block, I would not want one in a Trans Am. They put those in Trans Ams with automatic transmissions, and you don't want to rev that motor. It'll be fine if you don't rev it, and you don't want to be driving it in 100-degree heat. They have Siamese cylinder walls too. It's just not quite as robust as the other small blocks. So stick to pre-1977 for the GM small blocks, and you'll be fine. And yes, like I said, like a Chevy 307 is not going to light anybody's heart on fire, but it's not a bad motor. It's just not going to be a powerful motor. It's a smog engine. And then last, pre-displacement on demand LSV8s. So from 1997 through, they kept going in different vehicles through about 2007. The LSV8 with the displacement on demand system is still pretty good, but you have to make sure that the oil has been changed. Otherwise, you're going to run into lifter and valve train issues. But the pre-DOD LSV8s are supremely stout, robust, reliable, cheap to fix, low maintenance, hard to complain about. So they've powered everything from pickups to the sport utilities to the Corvettes to, I would probably stay away, not because of the motor, but they did dump them in some of the front-wheel drive W cars, like the Monte Carlo SS, the Impala SS, the LaCrosse Super, I think it was, and I think that's the extent of it. Because Pontiac had a GXP Bonneville, but that was a Northstar powered engine. So those you might want to stay away from, not because of the engine, but the transmission that they were coupled to just really couldn't handle the torque very well. Aside from that, if you want it's hard to find a new pickup these days or a used pickup in good shape. I would say you're actually better off going back to an older pickup if you can find one with lower miles, like from the late 90s with those pre-displacement on demand LSV8s from GM. You're going to get a nice truck that's going to be very reliable for you. Again, watch out for rust, but you find one with low miles, it's not rusty, I wouldn't be afraid of it even if it's 20 years old now. They run really well and they last a long time. So again, that's my list of best GM engines. And you notice on here there's not a 4-cylinder. And there's only one V6. Well, I don't think that in general GM's 4-cylinders were much to write home about. They definitely had some reliable ones. Some people call it the Iron Puke, the Iron Duke. Noisy, but quite reliable on balance, not very powerful. The Quad 4, or the so-called Quad Roar, which was powerful but liked to blow head gaskets and had water pump issues, especially in the early years. Once it became the 2.4 twin cam, it was much improved, although they still had water pump issues. But that engine, especially in its earlier years, was pretty noisy to the point that it was nicknamed the Quad Roar. And, you know, the other V6s, I could put on here the Buick 3.3 liter V6, which was a derivative of the 3.8. That was a robust engine. Did not have a balance shaft though, so a little bit more coarse than the 3800. I would not put the Buick 3 liter V6 that went into the A bodies early on in their lifetime in the early 80s on that list. Didn't have a strong bottom end, didn't have a great carburetor, just not good. So interestingly, even derivatives of the 3800, some of them are good, some of them are not. Like I said, I would personally stay away from the carbureted 3 liter V6s. But there's not really other V6s in the GM stable that are overly remarkable. I mean, one might say the 4.3 liter V6 that Chevy came out with wasn't bad. And it's based on the 350, so that maybe if you're looking for everyday reliability can be up there, but I wouldn't put these twin cam 3.6 liter V6s on there, or some of the other ones that came after the 3800, or the 3.4 V6s that preceded it, or the 3.1s. Some of those aren't bad from the early years, the 2.8s and 3.1s, the Chevrolet 60-degree V6. Once you get into the multi-port fuel injection system, like in the late 80s, early 90s, those aren't too bad, but not many V6s to write home about for GM. GM has kind of always been, for a number of decades, a V8-centric company, and they've made great V8 engines, albeit not all of them. So hope you enjoyed this video on best GM engines, and also hope shortly here the weather will break and we can get back to the road tests. If you're new to the channel, check out some of the other videos where you can see road tests of vehicles like my 72 Imperial, 70 Caprice, 66 Catalina, 65 Bonneville, and others. We will get back to those as soon as the warm weather hits, but until then, we get to have a great porch chat and interact, and really appreciate you taking the time to watch. Thanks again, and stay warm and take care. Thanks again for watching this porch chat video on some of the best GM engines of all time. Hope you enjoyed. Be sure to check out some of the road test reviews. I'll put a few